The floorboards in my son's house didn't just creak, they screamed. Every step I took at 2 a.m. felt like a gunshot in the oppressive silence of a home that had become our prison. My husband, Walter, gripped my hand so hard his knuckles were white. The same hands that had built a life for our children, now trembling as we carried a single suitcase toward the door. Behind us, in the master bedroom, our son Michael slept soundly, blissfully unaware that his wife was hours away from filing the paperwork to strip us of our humanity. She wanted our pensions, our dignity, and our freedom. She wanted to declare us incompetent so she could liquidate the last of our lives. But they forgot one thing: we aren't victims. We are the architects of this family, and tonight, we're tearing the blueprint down. By the time the sun rises, the burdens will be gone, and all they'll have left is the empty room and the crushing weight of their own greed. The rain in Oregon is different when you have nowhere to go. It doesn't feel like a cleansing wash, it feels like a heavy, cold shroud. I am 72 years old, and for most of those years, I believed that the walls of a home were built of brick and mortar. I was wrong. They are built of trust. And when that trust dissolves, the roof caves in, no matter how expensive the shingles are. Walter and I had lived in our Victorian house on Cedar Falls for 45 years. It was a house of echoes, echoes of Michael's first steps, of David's laughter before he put on a uniform and never came back, of Rachel's wedding preparations. It was a house filled with my quilts and Walter's hand-carved birds. But when Walter fell from that ladder and the medical bills began to pile up like a mountain of salt, we didn't hesitate. When Michael came to us, crying that his furniture shop was facing foreclosure and his wife, Vanessa, was terrified of the social shame, we did what parents do. We set ourselves on fire to keep our children warm. We sold the Victorian. We gave Michael every penny. We walked away from our history so he could keep his future. Moving into Michael's suburban home felt like stepping into a black and white movie. Everything was grey, beige, and sharp. Vanessa greeted us with a smile that never reached her eyes, a clinical, polite expression that reminded me of a nurse welcoming a terminal patient. "We've cleared out the den for you," she had said, her voice dripping with a forced sweetness. "It'll be easier for Walter's hip. Fewer stairs." What she meant was, "I want you contained." Within a month, the erasure began. My favorite armchair, the one David used to sit in when he came home on leave, was moved to the garage because it didn't match the aesthetic. Walter's toolbox, his pride and joy, was buried under stacks of holiday decorations. At the dinner table, the atmosphere was suffocating. If Walter reached for the salt, Vanessa's hand would snap out to stop him. "The doctor said your blood pressure, Walter. Let's be sensible." She spoke to us in the high-pitched, slow cadence people use for toddlers or the mentally infirm. She called it care. I called it a slow-motion execution of our independence. Our grandchildren, Ella and Caleb, were the only light in that house. Ella would sneak into our room for bedtime stories, her eyes wide as I described the garden we used to have. Caleb would sit on the floor by Walter's feet, watching him carve a tiny wooden bird with a pocket knife he'd managed to hide from Vanessa. "Grandpa," Caleb whispered one night, "why does Mommy look at you like you're breaking something?" Walter just stroked the boy's hair, his eyes filled with a sadness that broke my heart. "She's just worried, son. People get scared of things they can't control." The turning point came on a humid July night. I was returning from the laundry room, the scent of lavender detergent filling my nose, when I heard voices drifting through the air vent in the hallway. I stopped, the laundry basket heavy against my hip. "It's the only way, Michael." Vanessa's voice was sharp, a jagged edge cutting through the quiet. "Look at the assessment. Walter fell last week. Helen is getting forgetful. If we wait until something catastrophic happens, the state will step in. If we file for guardianship now, we control the assets. We can move them into a managed care facility where they'll be safe." "They aren't that bad, Van." Michael's voice was a weak murmur, a shadow of the man we raised. "Dad still carves. Mom still bakes. The kids love them. The kids are being conditioned by people who aren't thinking clearly." Vanessa snapped. "Their pensions, Walter's veteran stipend, it's all being wasted on comforts. If we have guardianship, we can pay off the rest of the shop debt and ensure our future. It's for them, Michael. It's for everyone." I felt the blood drain from my face. Guardianship. It was a legal death sentence. They wanted to take our names, our money, and our right to say no. They wanted to turn us into line items in a budget. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I went into our room and found Walter sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He didn't need me to tell him. He had heard it too. "They're going to put us in a home, Helen," he whispered, his voice cracking. "A place with white walls and scheduled naps. They're going to take my tools. They're going to take your quilts." "No," I said, a cold, hard resolve settling in my gut. "They aren't taking anything. Because we won't be here." We spent the next 3 days in a state of hypervigilance. We played the roles they expected. We moved slowly, we agreed with Vanessa's suggestions, and we stayed in our room. But at night, we were soldiers. I sold my grandmother's diamond ring to a jeweler downtown while Michael was at work. I tucked the cash into a secret lining in my purse. Walter gathered his 3 most essential tools, a hammer, a measuring tape, and his pocket knife, and hid them in a duffel bag. We wrote letters to the grandchildren, pouring our hearts onto the page, telling them that we weren't leaving them, we were leaving the shadows. The night we left was a Tuesday. The moon was hidden behind thick, Oregon clouds. We waited until the house settled into that deep, rhythmic hum of a family in REM sleep. We moved like ghosts. I carried our golden retriever, Buddy's, leash in my pocket to keep the metal from clinking. Walter carried the suitcase, his breathing heavy but determined. As we passed the kitchen, Walter stopped. He took the house key off his ring and set it on the marble countertop. It was a silent divorce. We stepped out into the night air. It was cold, and the rain was starting to mist, but as the door clicked shut behind us, I felt a surge of adrenaline that made me feel 40 years younger. We walked 3 miles to the bus station, my legs aching, Walter leaning heavily on his cane, but we didn't stop. We bought 2 tickets to Millbrook, a town we had only seen on a map. A town where no one knew us as the Burdens. The bus ride was a blur of neon signs and dark highways. We arrived in Millbrook at 5 a.m., looking every bit like the unstable seniors Vanessa claimed we were. Our clothes were wrinkled, our eyes were bloodshot, and we had a dog that looked just as confused as we did. We walked into a small diner called Dorothy's. The bell chimed, and a woman with silver curls looked up from a stack of menus. "You folks look like you've been through a war," she said, her voice warm and raspy. "We're just looking for a start," I said, my voice trembling. "Somewhere we can work. Somewhere we can be ourselves." Dorothy May didn't ask for our credit scores or our medical history. She saw the way Walter's hands were stained with wood dust and the way I clutched my knitting bag. Within 48 hours, she had offered us the small apartment above the diner in exchange for help. Walter became the town's unofficial handyman, fixing the leaking faucets and creaky doors that the younger generation didn't know how to touch. I became the baker, filling the air with the scent of cinnamon and sugar. In Millbrook, we weren't the parents who sold their house. We were Helen and Walter. We were the people who fixed things and made life sweet. We grew a garden in window boxes. We made friends with Frank, a trucker who brought us news from the road, and Maria, who taught me the local gossip. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting to die. I felt like I was learning how to live. Chapter 5. The Winter Reckoning. 6 months later, the snow began to fall, turning Millbrook into a postcard. We were closing up the diner for the night, the warm glow of their open sign reflecting off the drifts outside. The bell jingled. A man stepped in, his coat covered in white. He looked hollowed out, his eyes darting around the room with a desperate intensity. It was Michael. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Part of me wanted to run, to hide in the apartment and bolt the door. But Walter stepped forward, his hammer still in his belt, his posture straight. "How did you find us, Michael?" Walter asked, his voice steady. "Frank," Michael whispered, collapsing onto a bar stool. He mentioned an old couple in Millbrook who had the best pies and the sharpest tools. "I knew it was you. I've been driving for 3 days." "Why?" I asked, coming out from behind the counter. "Did you come to bring the guardianship papers? Did you come to finish what Vanessa started?" Michael put his head in his hands and sobbed. It was a raw, ugly sound. He told us everything. After we left, the house had turned into a war zone. Without our pensions to subsidize their lifestyle, the cracks in his marriage had become chasms. Vanessa had blamed him for letting us escape. She had grown increasingly bitter, her greed turning toward their own children. "She hid the letters from Rachel," Michael choked out. "My sister has been writing to you for months, terrified. Vanessa told her you moved to a high-end facility and didn't want visitors. I found the letters in her desk last week. I took the kids and left. Mom. I'm done. I lost my parents because I was a coward, and I wasn't going to let her take my children's souls too. Michael didn't stay long that night. He went back to the motel where Ella and Caleb were waiting. But the next morning, the diner was filled with the sounds I had missed the most. Grandma. Ella screamed, throwing her arms around my waist. You smell like apples. Caleb ran straight to Walter, who was sitting at a corner table with his carving block. Grandpa, did you finish the bird? Walter handed the boy a perfectly carved cedar sparrow. I was just waiting for you to help me sand it, son. Michael watched from the door, looking like a man who had finally found his way out of a dark forest. He didn't ask us to move back. He knew that the Victorian on Cedar Falls was gone. He knew that he had broken something that couldn't be glued back together. Instead, he moved into a small house 3 streets away. He started working as a carpenter's apprentice under Walter and Samuel. He spent his evenings at the diner, helping us mop the floors and prep the dough. He was learning how to be a son again, not by writing checks, but by showing up. Vanessa tried to sue. She tried to claim abandonment. She tried to claim Michael was kidnapping the children. But the letters she had hidden, the medical reports she had falsified, and the testimony of the people in Millbrook who saw us thriving were her undoing. She ended up with the suburban house and a mountain of debt, a queen of a kingdom of one. Last Thanksgiving, the diner was packed. We pushed all the tables together, mismatched cloths, chipped mugs, and a turkey that was big enough to feed the whole town. Frank was there. Dorothy was there. Maria and Samuel were there. And right in the middle were Michael, Ella, and Caleb. I looked at Walter. He was laughing, a sound I hadn't heard in the years we spent in Michael's basement. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We managed, Helen, he whispered. We always have. We did more than manage, Walter, I said, looking around at the family we had chosen and the family that had found their way back to us. We survived. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought mattered to find the only thing that actually does. We lost a house, we lost a dream of a peaceful retirement, and we lost the illusion of a perfect son. But in the wreckage, we found our voices. We found that 72 is not the end of the story, it's just the beginning of a much better chapter. I am Helen Harrington. I am a baker, a quilter, and a survivor. And if you're sitting in a room right now feeling like a burden, feeling like your voice doesn't matter because of the years on your face, remember this. The floorboards may creak, but you're the one who knows where the exit is. And the world outside is much wider than the corner they've tucked you into. If this story stirred something inside you, don't scroll away in silence. Tap like, it tells us these stories deserve to be told. Subscribe to Vengeful Goddess for unforgettable tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice, stories you won't hear anywhere else. Turn on the bell icon, so the next story reaches you the moment it drops. Your support keeps these voices alive. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud, being heard is.